The clinic room was dark when the inspector opened the door, and it stayed that way, because he did not touch the light switch. He had been told specifically not to draw attention. He had been told the night shift nurse would be occupied until 3 a.m. He had been told the woman in room 318 was sedated. He had been told a great many things by a man who had given him precise instructions and no real information at all. Inspector Ray Colbeck moved through the darkness with the unhurried confidence of someone who had entered rooms he wasn't supposed to enter before. His eyes adjusted. The faint glow of the monitoring equipment traced soft green lines across the ceiling, and somewhere below those lines, in the adjustable bed near the window, lay the woman who had been causing Deputy Minister Alton Prest a very expensive amount of trouble. He could see her breathing, slow and even. He crossed toward the small bedside cabinet where the devices were supposed to be. His fingers touched the surface of the table and found nothing. "You're 12 minutes late." The voice came from the bed, quiet and unhurried, like someone remarking on the weather. Colbeck stopped moving. Chioma Igwe had not opened her eyes when she spoke. She opened them now, and what he saw in them was not fear. It was the particular stillness of a person who has already absorbed the worst possibilities of a situation and decided they are manageable. She looked at him the way she might look at a problem in a line of code, not alarmed by it, simply locating it. "Prest told you to be here at 2:10, she said. "He called you from his personal cell at 11:47 last night. He told you I was a liability. He told you to collect my devices and make sure I understood that my firm's contract with the ministry would be terminated if I continued." She paused. "He didn't tell you I know all of this because I helped design the security messaging system for the government's encrypted messaging system. Every metadata trace on that platform runs through servers my company built." Colbeck found that his mouth had stopped producing language. "The phone under my left hand," she said, tilting her wrist slightly, "has been recording since you opened the door." 3 weeks earlier, the word that best described Chioma Igwe's relationship with the Ministry of Digital Infrastructure was unremarkable. Her firm, Igwe Secure Systems, had been contracted to conduct a third-party security audit of the ministry's digital health initiative. Routine work. The kind of contract her company handled quarterly, the kind that generated some politely worded reports that nobody in senior government actually read. Chioma had built a $2 billion company on the understanding that most organizations would rather pay for security than think about it, and the provincial government was no exception. She had grown up in a narrow house on Bellamy Road in Scarborough, the eldest daughter of 2 people who pressed other people's clothes for a living, and who had decided, independently and then together, that the point of arriving in Canada was to give their children the opportunity to press nothing for anyone. Her mother woke at 4:30 every morning for 22 years. Her father did not own a car until Chioma was 16. Neither of them had ever asked anyone for anything they hadn't already earned twice over, and Chioma had absorbed that discipline the way a child absorbs language. Not by studying it, but by living inside it, until it became the only way she knew how to be. She had started Igwe Secure Systems in a studio apartment in Kensington Market at 26, with a second-hand server rack and 3 clients she had convinced to trust her over competitors with Bay Street offices and golf club memberships. By 35, she had 200 employees. By 42, she had offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Halifax, a board that included 3 former federal cabinet ministers, and a security platform that protected the data of 11 provincial government agencies. She had built all of it methodically, the way her mother folded a dress shirt, with precision and no unnecessary motion. The anomaly appeared in the 3rd week of the audit. It was not dramatic, as anomalies rarely are. A contract number in the ministry's procurement database that corresponded to a deliverable that did not appear anywhere in the technical repository. A cybersecurity platform listed as fully deployed across 47 Ontario hospitals, for which there was no installation record, no user training log, no support ticket history, and no operational footprint of any kind. $341 million in approved expenditures, traceable back to a numbered company registered in the Cayman Islands, which traced to a second company in Delaware, which led, with a little more patience, back to a holding entity whose beneficial ownership records were sealed, but whose registered agent had signed correspondence on stationery, bearing the Ministry of Digital Infrastructure letterhead. Chioma had seen fraud before. She had testified as an expert witness in 2 federal procurement cases. She recognized the architecture of concealment the way a structural engineer recognizes the way a building is leaning. This was not an accounting error. This was a system, built carefully over 5 years, designed to survive exactly the kind of audit she had been hired to conduct. She requested a meeting with Deputy Minister Alton Prest. He was 62, a career bureaucrat who had outlasted 4 premiers and 7 ministers by being the kind of man nobody thought to distrust. He had the warm and slightly distracted manner of someone who had spent decades being the most reasonable person in every room. He offered her coffee. He said he was glad the audit was proceeding so smoothly. He asked whether she had identified any areas of concern. She told him what she had found. The warmth left his face in the way. Warmth always leaves the face of someone who has just realized their audience is not who they assumed. He recovered quickly. He was very good at recovering quickly, and told her the discrepancy she had identified was part of a classified infrastructure project that had been compartmentalized for reasons of provincial security. He used the word compartmentalized twice. Then he mentioned, in a tone of great reasonableness, that a firm of Igwe Secure Systems profile would naturally be well positioned to receive a significant consulting retainer from the ministry over the following fiscal year, should the audit conclude without incident. Chioma set down her coffee and told him she would be in touch. That evening, she was walking to her car in the ministry's underground parking structure when 2 men stepped out from behind a support column. She didn't see their faces. She felt the impact on the back of her head, felt the strap of her bag pulled away from her shoulder, heard the sound of running feet. When she regained full consciousness, she was in an ambulance, and a paramedic was asking her to track a small light with her eyes. Her laptop had been taken. Her phone had not. It had been in her coat pocket rather than her bag. She noted the distinction carefully. At the West Grove Private Medical Clinic, while her attending physician expressed cautious optimism about the concussion and recommended rest, Chioma's mind continued working. The clinic room was quiet, and she appreciated quiet. She had always done her best thinking in rooms where nobody was asking her anything. She had not brought the primary audit data to the ministry meeting. She had brought a summary on a presentation laptop, deliberately sanitized, containing enough to signal what she knew without revealing the depth of it. The actual audit findings, the complete forensic record she and her team had assembled, had been uploaded to a fragmented encrypted archive distributed across 4 independent servers before she had driven to the ministry that morning. If anyone wanted to locate the data, they would need to know which 4 servers, in what configuration, and the reassembly key. That key existed in 2 places only: a safety deposit box at a Scotiabank branch on King Street West and Chioma's memory. She had also, before leaving her office that morning, configured an automated release protocol. If her biometric credentials were not logged into Igwe Secure's internal system, within 72 hours, the assembled data would transmit simultaneously to the Toronto Star's investigative desk, the RCMP's Finance State Research Team, and the Federal Privacy Commissioner's office. She had missed 2 check-in windows. The third would close at 4:17 a.m. It was currently 2:34. She had not canceled the protocol. She saw no reason to. From her clinic bed, over 2 days, she had continued assembling the picture. The public procurement portal was accessible from any browser. Her phone, fully charged by the second morning, gave her everything she needed. She cross-referenced contract identifiers with corporate registry filings and matched payment dates against the internal timeline her audit team had already constructed. She found 11 more contracts following the same pattern. She found a ministry email domain used to communicate with one of the shell companies, a domain that had been decommissioned but whose archive had been incompletely wiped. She found a name appearing in the margin of 3 separate contract approval forms, a signature she recognized because she had seen it on the agreement that had brought her firm into this work in the first place. Alton Prest, over 5 years, had redirected the better part of $400 million in public health technology funding through a network of shell entities he controlled, directly or through intermediaries. The 47 hospitals that were supposed to receive integrated patient data systems had received, in most cases, rebranded off-the-shelf software with fraudulent certification documentation. Patient data had been processed through systems with no genuine security architecture. The audit was supposed to catch this. But Prest had expected to manage the outcome the way he had managed every other outcome for 30 years. On the second night, an anonymous message arrived in her encrypted professional inbox. The sender's credentials were government-issued, but the name attached to them belonged to a former IT contractor who had resigned from the ministry 18 months earlier. The message contained a compressed file, internal approval chains, handwritten notes photographed on a personal device, and a spreadsheet of wire transfer records that matched precisely the discrepancies Chioma had already located. A short accompanying note said only, "I tried twice. Nobody listened. I still have the originals." 2 hours later, a second message arrived, unencrypted and unsigned. "You have until morning to reconsider." Chioma read it twice and went to sleep. Back in room 318, Inspector Colbeck had been standing in the same position for nearly 3 minutes. He was a man accustomed to situations that resolve themselves through the application of authority, and this situation was not doing that. The woman in the bed had not raised her voice. She had not reached for the call button. She had simply spoken to him, as though she had been waiting for him, and was mildly disappointed he had taken so long. He tried a different approach. He told her she had misunderstood the nature of his visit. He was there because her firm had been flagged as the subject of an internal compliance review. He was there to ensure she received appropriate notification. His voice carried the practiced neutrality of a man who had spent many years saying things that sounded like one thing and meant another. Chioma listened to him finish and then asked with no particular heat whether ministry compliance reviews were typically conducted at 2:30 in the morning by officers who had not presented identification at the clinic's front desk. He had no answer for that because there wasn't one. She told him that she had already reviewed the digital footprint of the security system in this corridor. The external camera covering room 318 had been looped 20 minutes before he arrived. The internal camera had not been. She pointed toward the small ventilation grill above the doorframe. Behind it, a compact audio-visual recorder, the same model her firm sold to corporate clients for sensitive meeting rooms, had been capturing the room continuously since the previous afternoon. She asked him whether he would like to know whose authorization code had been used to loop the external camera. Colbeck looked at the ventilation grill. She told him it was Prest's office credentials. She said she imagined that would be a significant problem for the deputy minister, given that the camera system logs could not be retroactively altered without Igwe Secure's administrative override, because her firm had installed the system. The expression that moved across Colbeck's face then was not anger. It was the expression of a man who has just understood, fully and without the possibility of retreating from the understanding, that the assignment he accepted was not what he had been told it was. She did not push him. She understood something about the moment a person begins to reconsider. It requires space, not pressure. She let the silence do its work. He asked, eventually, what she wanted. She told him she didn't want anything from him. She already had everything she needed. Then she reached beneath the blanket and withdrew a small tablet. She opened a file and held it toward him, not demanding he look, simply making it available. He looked. The document on the screen was a procurement approval chain from 2019. His eyes tracked down the list of signatories and stopped at a name near the bottom. Inspector Del Harmon, RCMP Liaison, Ministry of Digital Infrastructure. Colbeck had known Del Harmon for 19 years. They had come up through the same division. He remembered when Harmon had taken the ministry liaison position, remembered that it had seemed like a genuine step up. He remembered, with less comfort, the story he had been told when Harmon left the role abruptly. That the transition to civilian work hadn't suited him, that he had chosen early retirement. He remembered accepting that story without looking behind it, the way a person accepts a door described as locked without testing the handle. Chioma told him that Harmon had submitted 2 internal reports flagging irregularities in ministry procurement. The first had been redirected by press office to a file that was never opened. After the second, Harmon had been assessed as unsuitable for the liaison role, and his transfer back to active duty had been quietly blocked. He had retired at 51, 6 months later. Colbeck stared at the document. The door opened. Alton Press did not look like a man who had expected to be standing in this room. He looked like a man who had sent someone to complete a simple task and had received a phone call suggesting the simple thing had not happened. A man who had then decided, against every instinct developed over 30 years of institutional self-preservation, to come and manage the situation himself. He was dressed in a charcoal overcoat, his silver hair precisely arranged even at this hour. He looked at Colbeck first, a look that contained both disappointment and a wordless command. Then he looked at Chioma. "You had every opportunity," he said, his voice controlled and very quiet, "to walk away from this without consequence. I offered you that. The retainer I described would have been worth considerably more than this contract. You were unreasonable." He stopped speaking when he registered, slowly, what he had just said out loud and in front of whom he had said it. Chioma did not respond immediately. She watched him work through the realization, the slight recalibration of the jaw, the almost imperceptible shift in posture. The way she had watched many executives work through the moment they understood they were in trouble. She asked him calmly which part of her response he had found unreasonable. He did not answer. He moved toward the small cabinet, and she told him without raising her voice that touching anything in the room would be inadvisable given the active recording, and that he was already on camera, entering through a side entrance whose access log would show his clearance badge had been used at 2:19 a.m. Prest straightened. He tried to recover the professional composure that had carried him through decades of impossible situations. He said that any recording taken in a private medical facility without consent would be inadmissible. Chioma agreed with him that it was a reasonable legal question. Then she told him it was also somewhat beside the point, since the automated transmission had been scheduled to complete at 4:17 a.m., regardless of what happened in this room, and that it was currently 3:11. Prest looked at the clock on the wall behind her. She told him that the ministry's financial records, the shell company registry, the wire transfer documentation, the camera loop authorization codes, Inspector Harmon's suppressed reports, and the anonymous sources documentation had been received by the Toronto Star, the CBC, the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit, and the Federal Privacy Commissioner's Office approximately 56 minutes ago. At the scheduled transmission time, because she had not canceled the protocol. The room was very quiet. Dr. Fiona Marsh had been making rounds for 30 years and had learned to recognize an irregular situation by texture before she could name it precisely. The quality of light under the door of room 318 had changed in the way a room changes when more than one person is inside it. She opened the door, assessed the room in 4 seconds, and told both men that non-clinical visitors were required to register at the front desk and that she would need to see their authorization before anything else occurred. Prest told her this was a matter of provincial jurisdiction. She told him that provincial jurisdiction did not extend to the clinical management of her patient, and that, if he believed otherwise, she would be pleased to have that discussion in the lobby with the clinic director, whom she intended to call within the next 30 seconds. She made the call without waiting for his response. 18 minutes later, a woman in a dark coat walked through the clinic's main entrance with the particular quality of presence that comes from spending 2 decades in courtrooms. Unhurried, precise, entirely unimpressed. Bernadette Lau asked both men to step outside the room. Prest objected. She told him she was aware of his position and that his position would shortly be a matter of considerable public record, and that he was welcome to escalate through any legal channel he preferred, beginning tomorrow morning. When she would have had time to review the documentation her client had already forwarded to her encrypted inbox. Prest looked at Chioma one final time. Whatever he searched for in her face, he did not find it. He left. Kolbeck stayed. He sat in the chair beside the bed and held his badge in both hands. For a moment, the way a person holds an object they are no longer certain belongs to them. Then he said he would like to make a statement. Bernadette returned to the room and listened while he spoke for just over 40 minutes. He did not protect Prest. He did not omit the details that reflected poorly on himself. He described every instruction he had received, every question he had chosen not to ask, every moment he had selected compliance over the discomfort of thinking carefully about what he was being asked to do. When he finished, the room was quiet. Chioma looked at him and told him she couldn't say the past 3 hours made things right. He said he knew that. She said what he could do. What would actually matter was to say all of it again on the record, in front of people who had the authority to do something with it. He did. The investigation was conducted by the RCMP's Federal Serious and Organized Crime Division and took 11 months. Prest resigned 4 days after the initial media coverage, citing health concerns that convinced no one. The resignations that followed over subsequent weeks involved 2 deputy ministers, a senior procurement director, and 3 individuals connected to the numbered companies. Del Harmon gave a statement to investigators and was formally cleared of any wrongdoing. His name was reinstated in the records from which it had been quietly erased. Emergency technical audits were ordered for all 47 hospitals. 22 required immediate remediation of their patient data systems. The work took 2 years to complete properly and cost the province considerably more than the original contracts had. The hospitals received systems that actually functioned. Patients whose records had been processed through the fraudulent platforms were notified individually. Chioma testified before a parliamentary committee in the spring, in a room full of faces that ranged from solemn to uncomfortable to openly grateful, depending on where each person sat in relation to what she was laying out. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She presented what she knew, in the order she had come to know it, with dates, file numbers, and source records entered into the formal record. Near the end of the session, one of the committee members asked whether she had been afraid at any point. She was quiet for a moment before answering. She said her parents had pressed other people's clothes for 22 years in a city that regarded them primarily as labor. She said that fear had never been the absence of threat. Fear had always been the clear understanding that the threat was real, and the question was only what you did with the next moment. She had built a company worth more than $2 billion by doing the next right thing in the face of every person who suggested she was overestimating herself. A deputy minister, in a charcoal overcoat, had not been considerably more difficult to face than the first bank that told her no, or the first corporate client who questioned whether a black woman from Scarborough understood enterprise security. The committee member did not ask a follow-up question. Some answers occupy the space where the next question would have been. She walked out of the committee building that afternoon into an April that had not yet decided whether it was winter or spring. The light was flat and pale, and the street held the particular smell of wet concrete that she associated with every beginning that had ever mattered to her. No one was waiting outside. Bernadette had offered to come, and Chioma had told her there was no need. She thought briefly about the men who had stepped out from behind that parking garage column, believing that what they took from her bag was the thing that held her together. She had been afraid that evening in the parking structure. She had been afraid in room 318 at 2:30 in the morning, with a corrupt inspector standing 3 feet from her bed. She had been afraid on the morning of her testimony, sitting in a corridor outside the committee chamber, with her hands folded in her lap and her breathing measured and even. None of those fears had made her decisions for her. She had simply, each time, refused to let them. That refusal, held quietly, without ceremony, across every locked room and every closed door, was the whole of it. That refusal was the reason she was standing in the April light now. Instead of being a story that had been smoothed over and filed somewhere no one would ever look. She put her hands in her coat pockets and walked toward the street, and she did not look back at the building. She had already said everything worth saying inside it.